On April 1st, 1864, Lieutenant General Ulysses S. Grant, who had recently succeeded Major General Henry W. Halleck as General-in-Chief of the Armies, would arrive at Fort Monroe. His reason for traveling from Washington, D.C. was simple: to meet with Major General Benjamin F. Butler and detail a plan, a truly ambitious one at that. This plan was a campaign up the James to assault Richmond, the capital of the Confederacy, from the south. This campaign, if successful, would be the death blow to the Confederacy. But disaster lay ahead for Benjamin Butler. This near-totally forgotten campaign, the Bermuda Hundred Campaign, would go down as one of the worst blunders in the U.S. military's history. Prior to 1864, a number of proposals had been made to assault Richmond from the south, specifically from the southern side of the James River. McClellan had proposed such an idea shortly after the failure of the Peninsula Campaign, though the then General-in-Chief Halleck had dismissed this. Similar proposals, such as a southern thrust into North Carolina, as proposed by Major General William B. Franklin and Brigadier General William F. Baldy Smith, had been proposed and similarly rejected by Halleck. Another general, Major General Benjamin F. Butler, had studied the topography of the area south of Richmond. There was a specific point of interest that had caught Butler's eye. The confluence of the Appomattox and James Rivers formed a large peninsula with a narrow neck less than 3 miles wide at its narrowest point. The area in question was known as Bermuda Hundred, a name derived from a group of English settlers that had landed there during the 17th century. Butler, being a skilled administrator, had noted the numerous benefits of establishing a base of operations there. It could act as a deep-water port, enabling supplies to be shipped directly to the location, had a large area of land, which could house thousands of troops, and could be easily defended with only a couple thousand men along its narrowest section. However, Butler wasn't the only one to note the significance of the area. Major General Samuel P. Heintzelman, a veteran of the Peninsula Campaign of 1862, had noted many of the same qualities and had written a letter to Butler on the 17th of February with a proposed plan. Independent from the other two, Grant had come to much the same conclusion. Grant, after becoming the new General-in-Chief, had went and visited with Major General George Meade, testing to see if Meade would be the right man to maintain his role as the head of the Army of the Potomac before heading to Fort Monroe. Grant's purpose for visiting Butler was twofold. He wished to propose the idea for his campaign up the James, but he also wished to meet with Butler personally and do much the same as he'd done with Meade. His reasons for doing so were warranted if the accusations against Butler were to go by. Butler, though a skilled administrator, was a political appointee with no real military experience. His previous military experience during the war up to that point had been the Battle of Big Bethel in 1861, with every other position being some form of administrative job. His management of New Orleans, where he issued the infamous Women's Order and nearly caused an international incident, being his most infamous. He would often clash with more professional military officers, especially with West Point graduates, and was known to be foul-mouthed. Maligned as Beast Butler, his overall opinion with the public had been soured, while his military prowess had been unproven. When Grant arrived at Fort Monroe on April 1st, he would finally be able to meet with Butler to test and see if these rumors were true. It was here that Grant asked for his idea of a spring campaign, to which Butler outlined his plan. To move upon Bermuda Hundred, capture City Point, a town situated on a peninsula near the confluence of the James and Appomattox, and move towards the fortifications along the James to threaten Richmond. This plan was almost identical to what Grant had concocted on his own, though with one significant difference. Grant further inquired if the Department of Virginia and North Carolina, augmented with additional forces, could conduct such a campaign, to which Butler had replied affirmatively. He would also produce a number of ruses that could be employed, which further impressed Grant. Though it is likely that many of these ideas had been produced by Heintzelman, Butler never gave him credit for the idea, likely keeping that bit of information to himself. In a remarkable turn of events, Grant came out of his engagement with Butler with a positive impression. Now confident in the oddly misshapen man, Grant would further confer with Butler in several letters over the coming weeks, detailing what units would be sent to his forces and providing an outline of his plan. Though their execution of the plan had been in line, there was one key difference between the two men that Grant wanted to affirm. In Butler's view, the main goal of the campaign ought to establish a base of operations at Bermuda Hundred. However, Grant had an entirely different main objective in mind. Grant, in his letter issued on April 2nd, makes it exceedingly clear that his main objective was to take Richmond, the capital of the Confederacy. Grant stated, "By such movement they interpose themselves between the enemy and the country to be guarded, thereby reducing the number necessary to guard important points, and at least occupy the attention of part of the enemy's forces, if no greater objective is gained. Lee's army and Richmond being the greater objectives towards which our attention must be directed in the next campaign. It is desirable to unite all the forces against them." He goes on, stating, "You will collect all the forces of your command that can be spared from garrison duty, I should say no less than 20,000 effective men, to operate on the south side of the James River, Richmond being your objective point." And repeats again, "The fact that has already been stated, that is, that Richmond is your objective point, and that there is to be cooperation between your force and the Army of the Potomac, must be your guide." In his correspondence from April 16th, Grant further affirms that Richmond is the main objective, but adds upon it additional details, stating, "What I ask is, that with them, and all you can concentrate from your own command, you seize upon City Point and act from there, looking upon Richmond as your objective point. If you can send cavalry to Hicks Ford and cut the railroad connection at that point, it is a good thing to do so. I do not pretend to say how your work is to be done, but simply lay down what, and trust to you and those under you for doing it well." In his final correspondence from April 18th, he adds a further stipulation, a measure in case Butler cannot carry the city. In it, Grant states, "I will, as you understand, expect you to move from Fort Monroe the same day General Meade starts from here. The exact time I will telegraph as soon as it can be fixed. At present, the roads are in such condition that the time could not be fixed earlier than the 27th instant. You can understand, therefore, you have fully to that date to make your preparations. You also understand that with the forces here, I shall aim to fight Lee between here and Richmond, if he will stand. Should Lee, however, fall back into Richmond, I will follow up and make a junction with your army on the James River. Could I be certain that you will be able to invest Richmond on the south side, so as to have your left resting on the James above the city, I would form the junction there. Circumstances may make this course advisable anyhow. I would say, therefore, use every exertion to secure footing as far up the south side of the river as you can, and as soon as possible." These orders express with as much clarity as possible what Grant wishes for Butler to do. Butler is to seize Bermuda Hundred in City Point, and then advance as far up the south bank of the James as possible. His main objective is to seize the city of Richmond, and, if he cannot, advance as far up the southern bank of the James as possible in order to enable Grant to encircle the city, destroying the railroad line linking Richmond and Petersburg in the process. In order to achieve this goal, Butler's force, which will now be known as the Army of the James, will consist of garrison forces from the Department of Virginia and North Carolina, becoming the 18th Corps under the command of Major General William F. Baldy Smith, and augmented with forces from the Department of South Carolina, becoming the 10th Corps under the command of Major General Quincy Gilmore, and a naval squadron under the command of Admiral Samuel Phillips Lee, third cousin to Confederate General Robert E. Lee. The force, consisting of over 30,000 men, would be a considerable force. However, even before the campaign began, underlying problems had crept in. Butler would have under his command a number of generals from his department and the Department of South Carolina. Some he would end up having decent relations, but many would have a sour taste towards him, with Butler showing similar sentiment towards them. First and foremost was Major General William F. Smith. Nicknamed Baldy due to his gradual hair loss, he was a skilled officer, but had two significant flaws. The first was his ease of raising contention towards his superiors. This flaw would be exposed shortly after Grant's meeting with Butler. Smith, an advocate for a thrust towards Wellington, North Carolina, still continued to press for this measure, even though Grant had concocted and affirmed his plan to take Bermuda Hundred. When General Order No. 146 was issued, assigning Smith under Butler's command, he grew exceedingly resentful towards Butler, avoiding contact with Butler as much as possible. The second, and possibly more significant flaw, was his lack of diligence. Butler, ever the critic, would later describe Smith's actions as interminable reconnaissance, waiting and waiting, not going at a thing when he was told, but looking all around to see if he could not do something else than what he was told to do, or do it in a different way from what he was told. By contrast, Brigadier General August V. Krauts had a much better time dealing with Butler. When Butler had proposed his plan for the cavalry for the upcoming campaign, Krauts had found some issues, prompting him to propose a more northerly route across the Blackwater River, which wouldn't require building a bridge and would not have to face the Petersburg defenses along the Blackwater, as no one had penetrated the defenses in force. To Krauts' surprise, Butler agreed with this change, leading to a positive relationship between the two commanders. However, Brigadier General Alfred Terry, then temporary commander of the 10th Corps, had caught Butler's ire, suspecting that he directly communicated with Halleck. Butler would also have strongly negative opinions on soon-to-be Major General Quincy Gilmore. Gilmore had waited in South Carolina for as long as possible, not relinquishing command of that department until May the 1st. His reasoning: he was still waiting for his promotion to be finalized. Until then, Alfred Terry would be in command of the 10th Corps, as his promotion to Brigadier General antedated Gilmore's promotion. This, of course, acted as an additional wrench in Butler's execution of the planned campaign. However, with Gilmore's arrival, the campaign would begin on May the 4th, 1864, in conjunction with Grant's crossing of the Rapidan River that same day. While Benjamin Butler was preparing for the upcoming campaign, Robert E. Lee had begun to note the considerable federal buildup taking place around Fort Monroe. On April 12th, Lee would write a letter to Jefferson Davis, stating, "If they are preparing armed transports and launches for disembarking troops, I think they can only be intended for the James River. We should be prepared in that quarter. A landing may be intended at City Point to capture Drury's Bluff." The preparations for the federal assault would fall on the shoulders of Major Generals George Pickett, commanding the Department of North Carolina, and Major General Robert Ransom, commanding the Department of Richmond. While Ransom's department consisted of the city of Richmond and its immediate surroundings, Pickett's department consisted of the near entirety of North Carolina and the southern portion of Virginia, a department that had only 13,500 men in total. Pickett, who had served as the department head after his division had been depleted at the Battle of Gettysburg, had seen this issue and had petitioned Richmond for more troops, though this would fall on deaf ears. The addition of contradictory reports meant that Major General Braxton Bragg, Pickett's immediate superior, was unwilling to provide additional forces for the Petersburg area. Instead, at least 4 brigades were under the command of Brigadier General Robert Hoke, in anticipation for a campaign towards New Bern, North Carolina. However, the situation would change dramatically that month. Pickett would soon be replaced by Major General P.G.T. Beauregard. Beauregard, who had recently been commanding the defense of South Carolina, would take up the defense of this department, which would be further expanded with the incorporation of the Department of Cape Fear. Beauregard would later call this enlarged department the Department of North Carolina and Southern Virginia. In the meantime, Pickett would remain in command of the district around Petersburg, while Beauregard would take over management of the department's scarce resources. Beauregard, upon gaining further intelligence, would come to the same conclusion Lee had made earlier in the month. The Federals would be conducting an offensive up the James. He would later request for and would receive additional troops to his department. Henry Wise's Virginia Brigade, under the command of Brigadier General and former Governor of Virginia, Henry A. Wise, and Johnson Hoggood's South Carolinians would be transferred northward, initially heading to Welton, but being directed towards Richmond. Even with these reinforcements, the department was spread thin, and the newly formed Army of the James was now ready to sail up the James and begin their operation. The flotilla of warships of the Union Navy and transports carrying thousands of men progressed up the James totally unopposed. While the 1st and 2nd United States Colored Cavalry fanned along the northern bank, Federal troops would occupy Wilson's Wharf, Fort Powhatan, and seize City Point by late afternoon on May 5, 1864. The operation up the James had gone without a hitch. After seizing City Point, the Army of the James would claim the Epps House, a plantation house located at the tip of City Point, as the general's headquarters. To Butler and his subordinates, the campaign might likely be a cakewalk. Back at Welton, Beauregard had received telegraph transmissions from George Pickett. His scouts had returned with reports of the Federal fleet sailing up the James. Reacting quickly, Beauregard sent dispatches to Hoke, recalling his forces back to Welton from their planned expedition to New Bern. Similar dispatches were sent to Chase Whiting, stating that all available trains were to be used to transport Hoggood's brigade to Petersburg. In the meantime, Beauregard provided orders to Pickett, telling him to keep his forces concentrated near Petersburg. Pickett, meanwhile, was in a panic. His forces consisted of one infantry regiment, the 31st North Carolina Infantry, the Washington Artillery Regiment, and whatever militia the city of Petersburg could bring about. This force consisting of a motley mix of older men, mainly business owners, and young boys below the regular age of service of 18. This force, consisting of only 1,400 men, was the only force standing between Petersburg and over 30,000 men landing at City Point, less than 8 miles from Petersburg. To the north, Ransom's Department of Richmond had at least several brigades it could field, including Eppa Hunton's and Seth Barton's Virginia Brigades, Archibald Gracie III's Alabama Brigade, and Bushrod Johnston's Tennessee Brigade. Johnston's brigade would be transferred to the defensive works surrounding Drury's Bluff the evening of the 5th. The Confederates were poorly prepared for such a defense, leaving the initiative to Benjamin Butler's Army of the James. And yet, his army and Lee's naval squadron partook in cautiousness. They had advanced as far east as Ware Bottom Church by the 6th. Less than a mile behind the picket line of the 10th Corps, the defensive line that would now protect the Federals' new base of operation would be constructed, stretching southward towards Point of Rocks on the northern bank of the Appomattox River. However, on the 6th, while Butler was riding northward to check on Gilmore's sluggish command, a unit of Confederate cavalry had conducted a sudden ambush that had been directed at Butler's retinue. Though Butler was able to escape unmolested, it would serve as a warning of the potential threats that lie ahead. After having pushed for aggressive action the previous evening, Butler soon adopted a more cautious approach, along with Smith and Gilmore. With their base of operations established, it was now up to these 3 men to conduct their assault upon the city of Richmond, to hopefully bring an early end to the war. Would they be able to carry the day, or will their efforts be all for naught?